Every day, the news brings more and more images of random violence, torture, and sexual aggression right into our living rooms. Violence and violent images permeate more and more aspects of our lives. And I think it's time to draw the line.
Thanks, Joe. I'm Ronnie Ersenbach, and this is the Band Media Podcast, where we will be talking about the art that crossed that line. I know this may be a few months early, but there's a special kind of magic that comes around every 6 or 7 years, and that's Halloween on a Saturday. Now, granted, this last year, that didn't go as great as we would hope, but I'm sure this won't come as the greatest shock, nor do I make any delusion that I'm the only one, especially among you fine listeners, friends, if I may be so bold, that feels this way, but I fucking love Halloween. Favorite holiday ever by a long shot. Spooky movies, so much candy, and the music, wonderful. And at this point, I may be going off on a little bit of a side tangent, but stop and think about the practice of trick-or-treating. Kids get dressed up however they want and go door to door and ask for candy. Literally not even ask. Just say a super cool password and we give them candy and then tell them how awesome they look. By the way, us grown-ups, we get to dress however we want too. I'll tell you a little fun fact about yours truly. Every year I go and pick up a Costco-sized box of full-sized candy bars. Now, don't get me wrong, that's not going to last me the whole night. I do pick up the fun sizes for getting through the whole night. But for the early birds, they get that full-size candy bar. And sometimes you will see their faces light up like they found a goddamn treasure. I have heard kids scream in excitement, "Oh my God, I got a full-size candy bar." I challenge you to find one practice that is as joyful, inclusive, and community-driven as trick-or-treating. Go ahead. I'll wait. I'm kidding, of course. I'm not going to wait. I have to do the podcast. This one is already going out a bit late. Sorry about that, friends. So, is this episode about the 1978 John Carpenter classic Halloween? Nope. We may or may not get around to do an episode on Halloween one day, but certainly not before we do one on the 1974 Tobe Hooper rest in peace classic, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Which, real quick triple fun facts, the narrator at the beginning of the film was John Larroquette. You can tell because he sounds exactly like John Larroquette. Director Tobe Hooper was originally shooting for a PG rating, which he missed by a lot. And the movie is the only reason I know how to spell the word massacre correctly. Massacre. Massacre. So if it's not the movie Halloween, have I stooped so low as to now defining holidays as a form of media for the sake of the podcast? Not quite, but I got my eye on you, Feast of Sinterklaas. You know what you did, the Netherlands. No, this week we will be talking about Ghostwatch, a made-for-TV movie by BBC One, which premiered on Halloween night, Saturday, October 31st, 1992. Now, for reasons we will get into in just a bit, catching this program the first time it aired was a big part of the controversy that came to follow. Sadly, I missed it. I was 8 years old, knocking on 9 when it came out, but I am, for better or worse, an American. And as a pre-internet American child in 1992, the only scraps I got of the BBC, or British Broadcasting Corporation, were reruns of Monty Python's Flying Circus and The Benny Hill Show on daytime Comedy Central during summer break. So, like always, I will do my best to present you with the history and repercussions of the program, but may I suggest that you get a real Brit's point of view on the film. Head over to episode 4 of the Retro Podcast Massacre, 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 to listen to Val Thomas and his review of the film. Then do yourself a favor and listen to all the rest of the Retro Podcast Massacre episodes. And then do yourself another favor and go check out his new podcast, The Big Screen Biograph. I guarantee, well worth your time. I would wear that man's voice as a blanket if I could. So, without further ado, here are this week's trigger warnings. Or this week's trigger warning, really. We will be talking about suicide. Now, if truth be told, the film doesn't even touch on suicide, really. All things being equal, it's a pretty tame film. In fact, it may be the most tame piece of art that we've had on the podcast, with the exception of Death Race. As I said before, Ghostwatch ran once on the BBC, Halloween night of 1992. The premise was simple, but still ahead of its time. The program would send a crew into a supposed haunted house in England and would search for any paranormal activity or unexplained phenomena that they could find, with all the cutting-edge technology of the day, including motion detectors, temperature sensors, and covert cameras. And, not to be overlooked, the thermographic camera, which is a big fancy name for predator vision. Keep in mind that this was about a decade before this type of ghost hunting format would explode in popularity with shows like Most Haunted or Ghost Hunters in the early 2000s. And also before this type of technology became cheap enough that enthusiasts could go out and buy their own. The crew in the field, aka the haunted house, would report back to the studio, where host Michael Parkinson's and paranormal expert Dr. Lynn Pascoe would give commentary through the live broadcast. Parkinson being the skeptical Scully, and Dr. Pascoe being the spooky Mulder. Now, depending on where you were from, the name Michael Parkinson might not mean that much to you, as admittedly was the case for me. But, as it turns out, in the UK, Sir Michael Parkinson is somewhat of a big fucking deal, or as they would say, somewhat of a jolly fucking deal. Just a short sampling of his long laundry list of achievements include being ranked 8th in a list of the 100 greatest British television programs drawn up by the British Film Institute in 2000, voted on by industry professionals. In April 2006, Parkinson was awarded honorary patronage of the University Philosophical Society. He was also voted number 20 in ITV's TV's 50 Greatest Stars. And on June 4th, 2008, he was actually knighted by the Queen at Buckingham Palace. So the dude had some clout. He also wasn't the only heavy hitter in the time of that program. In the studio with him and Dr. Pascoe was Mike Smith, aka Smithy. And for the record, I know I have in the past given cutesy little nicknames to some of the subjects of this podcast, but Smithy was indeed his on-air nickname. And he was an English television and radio presenter, race car driver, pilot, and businessman. During the 1980s, he co-hosted BBC TV's Breakfast Time and was among rotating presenters for the music show Top of the Pops, broadcast on BBC One. Meanwhile, on the scene, we had Smithy's wife, Sarah Green, who herself was an English television presenter and actress. Fun fact, on September 10th, 1988, Sarah would be involved in a helicopter crash that left her with 2 broken legs and a broken arm, and left the pilot with a broken back and ankle. The pilot, by the way, none other than then fiancé Mike Smithy Smith, though I guess there was no hard feelings because they would go on to get married the next year in 1989. By the time Ghostwatch had come around, Sarah had become most known for hosting the then currently running children's TV show Going Live. As Sarah covered the inside of the house, Craig Charles was on the outside getting interviews and reactions from the audience of neighbors that had assembled around the scene. Craig Charles, for those of you who don't know, was the star of Red Dwarf, the English sci-fi sitcom cult classic. The live program starts off lighthearted enough. We meet Dr. Pascoe. The rest of the correspondents need no introduction for the audience at the time. After a little prank that Craig pulls by dressing up in a spooky Halloween mask and hiding in a pantry, Sarah goes in to speak with the family, who, despite their tales of haunting, seemed cheerful enough and excited to be on the TV. A phone number is even given out for viewers at home to call in and share their own personal ghost stories. We find out that the poltergeist that haunts the home made himself first known by creating a sort of banging in the walls. The mom of the family told her daughters that the sound was nothing to worry about because it was just the plumbing. As the incidents began to intensify and it became apparent to the family that they were dealing with a real deal apparition, the kids gave it the nickname Pipes because the mom would say, "Oh, it's just the pipes." But alas, the hour was starting to get late and it was time for the little ones to go off to bed. So Mom takes her 2 daughters and tucks them in, heads back down to the crew downstairs to continue the interview. But back in the studio, callers are calling in, as callers do, saying they saw something in the girls' room, standing in front of the curtain, right by the window. Back at the studio, they pull up the clip. It does look like something was there. It's hard to make out, but maybe. Parkinson and even Dr. Pascoe write it off. Parkinson sees nothing, and Dr. Pascoe sees only a shadow from the curtains. Fast forward to later, and Pipes makes his first appearance to the TV crew with his trademark banging. It is a very real and unmistakable pounding that rings out in the house. But there is another sound. The sound of the motion detector was tripped. They pull up the feed, and to their complete shock, laying on the hall floor was one of their daughters, banging on the pipes. So that was it. Mystery solved. It was a hoax the whole time. A little anticlimactic, but it was a fun holiday experience. All involved knew that this is how it would most likely end up. No one really expected to see a ghost on live TV, except for maybe Dr. Pascoe, who, while mostly understanding of her big loss, was still trying to suss out that something was up. But here's the thing. What of that strange figure that the crew and the rest of the audience maybe saw? Also, the phone calls kept coming in. Not only had viewers seen pipes in different spots of the footage, but they also started experiencing hauntings in their own homes. Phenomena that had never happened before they started watching Ghostwatch. There was this unmutable feeling that there was something wrong going on here. But, dear listeners, there was one vital piece of information that many in the home audience didn't know. It's the same piece of information I've withheld from you so far. And that's that this wasn't a live event. It was a teleplay. It wasn't even being performed live. It had been filmed weeks ago. In fact, at that very moment that it was broadcasting, the cast and crew were watching it at their wrap party on some yacht. The BBC had taken steps to ensure that the public knew that this was a drama, such as putting it in the drama time slot. They displayed the Screen 1 banner, which was their fictional anthology series that Ghostwatch was a part of, and even put a written by credit at the beginning for the program's creator, Stephen Volk. But here's the thing about that. It was back in the days of broadcast TV. TiVo wouldn't even make an appearance for 8 more years. Forget about streaming. The program started when it started. And if you missed the beginning, like if you were out celebrating Halloween or even just taking a piss, then you missed it. Gone forever until the next rerun came around. Needless to say, a lot of folks missed that warning. Now, remember that hotline you could call in on to tell your own ghost stories? If any concerned citizen called that number, they would be treated to a recording that informed them that the program was in fact fictitious and would be left the option of leaving a message. However, the BBC was flooded with over 30,000 calls. So the message that most folks received was nothing more than a busy signal. Now, be forewarned, here comes the spoilers. I'm not going to give you a beat by beat of the entire movie, but I'll let you know some of the more important tidbits that paved the way for some of the controversy that would come barreling down on November 1st. After we find out that the daughter had supposedly been perpetrating the hoax, Pipes' manifestations became bigger and bolder in the house and started in the studio and in houses across England. Dr. Pascoe, who I can now tell you was played by Gillian Bevan, eventually figures out that Pipes is real and he is using the power of the broadcast to create a sort of national seance that has amplified his power to incredible levels. By the end of the program, all the studio lay in ruin with Parkinson possessed, and back at the house, Sarah had been sucked into a small doorway under the stairs, which was both unfortunately and hilariously referred to as a glory hole with no sense of irony throughout the entire film. And the police ended up showing up on the scene. When the morning papers ran less than 12 hours later, all of them had headlines about the already infamous Ghostwatch, the show that traumatized a nation. The fallout came quick and it came heavy. Even though the vast majority of the record-setting 11 million people who saw it did recognize it as a fiction, the media and the public were in an uproar. There was a feeling that the BBC had betrayed their trust, especially by using trusted BBC personalities to portray themselves. They felt duped and that the BBC had pranked them. According to the creators, though, that wasn't the idea at all. The project had originally started off as a 6-episode series about a paranormal investigator investigating a supposed poltergeist that horror writer Stephen Volk pitched to the BBC. While they turned the pitch down, they did ask if he could condense it for a Halloween special, so he decided to just use the idea for the final episode, which is where the ghost attacked on a live TV special. For her part, director Leslie Manning started studying the language of TV as soon as she read the script. The end result was obviously more than a little bit effective. In fact, if you can, give it a watch. It won't be the same effect as watching it in 1992 in the UK, but it's held up surprisingly well over the past 30 years and has moments of genuine creepiness and off-puttingness. Among the countless complaints in tabloids and news articles, a few in particular stood out. A Catholic vicar had contacted the show saying that he knew it was fake, but nonetheless, by airing it, they had managed to conjure up an actual real demonic entity. 3 women were reported to have gone into labor from shock while watching the program. They even got a letter from the wife of a veteran who had fought in the Falklands War, demanding that the BBC compensate them to the tune of 1 new pair of pants after the husband had shit his own during the broadcast. But it wasn't all fun and games. Sarah Green, the lovable correspondent who got sucked into the glory hole, had to go back to her children's TV show and explain to all the kids that she was in fact okay and that the show they saw was fake. The producer and a BBC executive had to go on a show called Bite Back, where the audience got to tear into them while they tried to defend the program. The show has the distinction of being the first show to cause PTSD in children by the British Medical Journal. The cases in question were 2 10-year-old boys. It should be noted, though, that 4 other children were thought to have PTSD, but it was later diagnosed as brief anxiety after having watched the program. But, sadly, there was one headline that was not hyperbole. It read, quote, "This TV program killed our son," end quote. Martin Denham, a mentally delayed 18-year-old factory worker with the mental age of a 13-year-old, watched the show with his parents and his brother. Their home actually did have problems with the central heating, causing the pipes to bang from time to time. Martin hung himself 2 days later from a tree called the Witch Tree close to his home. He left behind a suicide note that simply read, quote, "Dear ma'am, please don't worry. If there are ghosts, I will be a ghost, and I will be with you always," end quote. His parents blamed the BBC. So with all this backlash, the BBC eventually folded. They never aired the show again and even stopped mentioning it altogether. Here's the thing, though. The silence seemed to only fan the flames. Not necessarily over the controversy, but as its status as an urban legend. One of the strokes of genius in this film is that you can actually see Pipes a rumored 13 times. Each appearance is a blink and you'll miss it style cameo. Now, this wasn't the first time something like this had been done. The Exorcist very famously does this with quick cutaways to the demon's face, But you could go watch The Exorcist again. You could tell your friends and have them keep an eye out. That wasn't the case with Ghostwatch. Folks had to live with what they thought they saw versus what their friends thought they saw, unless you were lucky enough to come across a bootleg VHS, which went for about £50 or about $70. And keep in mind, this is in 1990s money. And so it was the case for 10 years. But for its 10-year anniversary, the BBC released it on VHS and on DVD. In the UK, especially amongst a certain generation, Ghostwatch was a household name. But it had also gained an underground cult status here in the States after the rise of found footage film. It became like the daddy of all of those, like the deep cuts of the genre for the horror kids. Though it never aired on UK airwaves again, it has been aired internationally on stations such as Canada's digital channel Scream for Halloween in 2004 and Belgian channel Canvas in 2008. From 2017 to 2019, Ghostwatch was available on American streaming video service Shudder. Shudder, by the way, if you're listening and interested in reaching out to literally tens of people, feel free to contact my people. And the program was made available on the Internet Archive in 2017. You know, there was one influence on the show that is kind of plain to see now in the age of internet, where we can pull up clips from anywhere from the long history of TV on YouTube. That was the case of the Enfield poltergeist. For those unfamiliar, it is the quote-unquote true story that the movie The Conjuring 2 was based on. The film that follows the continuing adventures of demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren, even though they were only at the site of the haunting for a day and didn't really do anything. And you'll have to excuse my French, but those two were charlatans. Now, I don't know whether or not they believed their own lies, which can happen in areas of studying the supernatural, but they swindled the same amount of money from folks who bought their books, whether they believed themselves or not. The main team that studied the site was the Society for Psychical Research. And to be honest, they're not any better. I hate to say it, friends, but there simply just is no such thing as ghosts or demons. If you are convinced there are, and that they are in some way directly communicating to you, may I ask you please seek help from a professional. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. I'm not at all ashamed to admit that I have both a psychiatrist and a therapist. And while I've never had a break with reality quite that severe, I've known people who have, and I'm grateful that they sought out help. You remember Martin Denham, the kid who killed himself after he thought he was being haunted by pipes? I guarantee you, his family would rather spend just one more day with him than the rest of their life with his ghosts, whether that is real or not. And the same is absolutely true for each and every one of you and your loved ones, dear listeners. One final fun fact before I'll go. I'll miss you, friends. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time on the Band Media Podcast. Oh, there goes that music again. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Band Media Podcast. Email us at bandmediapodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Ronnie Ursenbach. And please like, comment, subscribe. And if you donate blood, come join our Band Media Podcast team on the Red Cross app. And if you don't donate blood, then think about starting and then do the thing I just said. Well, that's enough of my rambling for now, but keep being wonderful, dear listeners. Adios.